Indeed, Simpiwe, and as you say, the 21st of March, of course, a seminal day on the calendar of South Africa in terms of our rights, which is why this month has been termed Human Rights Month. And I think it's also, just a good way to remind ourselves about the highest price that was paid by so many men, women, and children in this country. They paid in blood for some of the civil liberties that you and I sometimes take for granted. And perhaps we need a reminder every now and again as to the fact that these rights are so important and how hard fought they were. So we're continuing here. There will be a 5-kilometer walk, as we were indicating earlier, and looking at the Wall of Remembrance and remembering, keeping memory alive of those who have gone before, those who have made those sacrifices and paid the ultimate price in some instances. Well, I'm joined now to take the discussion further about today's proceedings by the Deputy Minister in the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, Mr. John Jeffrey. And Mr. Jeffrey, thanks so much for your time and welcome to Morning Live. Of course, a beautiful setting, but against a backdrop where as South Africans, it's perhaps a good thing that we're pulling ourselves back and thinking about the right to dignity in this country.
Sure, yes. Very much with apartheid, it was dignity, the dignity of people that was being affected. People were subjected to enormous indignities, were not treated as proper human beings. And so it's not just looking back, it's also looking forward, that we need a society founded on human dignity. That's a very fundamental, a very important human right.
And then we forget that sometimes because, under apartheid, there was this notion that epistemologically, black people were not the same as white people. We seem to have forgotten that very quickly.
No, very much. And it was started before apartheid. It started with the arrival of the European colonizers. You had a situation, it's way before apartheid. People today may not know about it, but Indian people could not live in the Free State. They couldn't even sleep in the Free State. That's something from the old Boer Republic. But I think the setting here is also quite important. We're in Freedom Park. On one of the neighboring hills is the Voortrekker Monument. Which is a symbol of another history. But it's also part of our history.
Part of our history that we should take the time to know and actually care about. But looking at, the right to dignity today, we're speaking from a premise whereby we have some South Africans, unfortunately, having to drink water from the same trough as animals, whereas as we heard from the now former CEO of Eskom, we have some of our leaders in this country who are feeding from the trough of Eskom and basically doing the country a major disservice and stripping people of their rights. Because, you look at some of the stories that are unfolding at the moment. The president, for example, in his answering response to a court application saying that it's not his responsibility to provide electricity, but we forget that that very electricity in some instances pumps the water that people have an inalienable right to.
Yeah, look, Sakina, you've said a mouthful, but let me just respond this way, that any form of corruption is wrong, it is killing our country, but it needs to be investigated so that there can be consequences for the people that were involved in that corruption. On the issue of the president's affidavit, I think that the issue is that that was an affidavit in a legal argument, and those words, if they were words in the affidavit, were taken out of context. There was a legal argument. So with respect, I don't think it's the right thing to raise like that. But yes,
but it's a legal argument that speaks to the dignity of people in South Africa.
Well, it's a legal argument in a case around Eskom and whether the court should make certain rulings on Eskom. So it's in particular in terms of that context. But let me just agree with you that, yes, our struggle in South Africa is to ensure that all people in South Africa South African citizens, but also other residents, have the right or have their human dignity. And that can't happen if people are hungry. It can't happen if people don't have adequate sanitation. It can't happen if people, as you say, don't have drinking water, access to adequate health care, those kinds of things. So that is something that we've got to continue struggling for. And what is, though, useful and important is that post-94, that is something that is recognized. Before then, it wasn't. I mean, just one sort of fun fact, as it were, I think in a few years of their rule, certain years of their rule, the National Party government demolished more houses than were built.
So, and there are, of course, those gains that one cannot overlook. There are, of course, many more houses that were built because there was a time in this country where generation upon generation had to make do with the same dwelling facilities. So those are gains that we can't overlook. But at the same time, when it comes to people's rights as enshrined in the Constitution of this country, how do we ensure going forward that those are actually upheld better than we have done hitherto?
Look, it's as I said, it's a continuous process. Obviously, the rights are justiciable, which means that they can be tested in court. So a lot of the constitutional court cases do concern or do revolve around the right to human dignity and whether that has been violated. So if something is done either by government or some other person, private person, and somebody feels their dignity has been violated, that's something that that needs to be, that the court will address.
But Deputy Minister, you know as well as I do that it's very difficult to litigate in this country because it's costly. So if someone is sitting in a far-flung rural area in South Africa, what are the chances that they will be able to litigate in order to have their human rights enforced?
Yeah, look, there's are places that people can go to, and there is a lot of litigation that is taking place on behalf of poorer people. But maybe let me just bring in one issue, and that is the question that there's a bill that was out for public comment on decriminalizing the selling and buying of sex. That issue does also relate to the human dignity of people selling sex. So it's not a question. So the issue with human dignity that we've got to look at is what's important is not just my right to dignity, but your right to dignity, other people's right to dignities, and people's right to dignity when we don't agree with them. So I would say that issue of decriminalization of the selling and buying of sex is very much a human dignity issue.
It certainly is. And the reality, though, for most South Africans is their dignity when they walk out the door. When you have to walk into a street that is overrun with sewer waste, where's the dignity in that?
No, sure, that is wrong, and that should not be happening. And whatever level of government those problems are at, usually it's local government, that those problems should be addressed. It is not acceptable.
So I don't suppose government will litigate against itself, because I was going to ask you, in terms of just the Department of Justice, where we talk about people who really cannot go out and litigate unless they have some benevolent organization or people coming to their aid. Isn't there something more that needs to be done at a governmental level to ensure that rights are upheld?
Well, it's not just a question of litigation, it's also ensuring that there's oversight. So every level of government, local government, provincial government, national government, has a legislature, a council or a legislature, and that is meant to monitor how people are performing in terms of delivery and addressing these problems. So I think it's also something where there are problems of sewerage in the streets, incredibly bad roads, The councils should be addressing that issue, and
But they are not.
well, they should be.
They are not. We even had the national government have to come down to fix potholes because the municipalities can't
but
do
they,
it.
they should be, and that is they're elected by the people. So it's ultimately the people, the voters, who are accountable, who are responsible for holding people to account, rather. As far as litigation, look, we do have the Human Rights Commission who are there to deal with issues of human rights. They're meant to produce a report on socio-economic rights in Parliament. They can also assist with litigation. Legal Aid South Africa, which is state funded, also has got some resources to do litigation. But it's really not just litigation. That's if everything else has gone wrong. It's ensuring that government functions better.
And it's exactly that point at which we have to leave it. Unfortunately, it seems that's the way we tend to go. You know, there was a report by the CSIR a few years ago that was entitled The Smoke That Calls, because communities feel that they have to resort to some sort of vandalism, burning, because it's only when the smoke gets up into the air that government seems to respond. Well, quite a lot to talk about here in Human Rights Month here at this particular event. But for now, it's back to Simpiwe in the studio, and we'll join you again later.